The Market-Ready Producer Training Program, coordinated by the University of Kentucky and currently offered in 15 states, is a one-day in-person training. Participating producers work through 15 different business functions to prepare them to meet the differing needs of restaurants, schools, and grocery, wholesale, or retail businesses. More information about this program, including upcoming trainings, can be found at www.uky.edu/marketready. MarketReady Mastercourses expand on one or more of those business functions to give MarketReady graduates deeper insight into concepts introduced in the general training. Today's topic is insurance, and our guest panelists will be sharing their perspectives on a number of important farm and agribusiness insurance questions. Before we begin, we want to especially thank the Specialty Crop Block Grant Program for the funding that made this webinar possible. We also want to recognize our partners, the Kentucky Department of Agriculture, UK Cooperative Extension Service, the Food Systems Innovation Center, and the Kentucky Center for Agricultural and Rural Development.
Kevin, do you want to go ahead and introduce the two other guests that you have with you?
Sure, I'd be glad to. I've got Kelly Justice. She is actually the farm underwriting manager for Kentucky Farm Bureau, and Lynn Benningfield, who also assists our area.
Great, thank you. So we'll go ahead and get started with some of the questions. Our first question that we get often is, how do distributors typically work with producers to explore the proper insurance needed to participate? So Cray, I don't know do you want to touch on that a little bit for us?
Yeah, I'll help in any way I can. This is an interesting question for me. We and this kind of separates us from other wholesalers. We have yet to require any explicit insurance on behalf of a farmer, and I know that a lot of folks appreciate that, and that's a plus for local farmers who want to work with us. And I understand that a lot of large distributors do, and I suspect this has to do, it may be something that comes along someday. I would imagine that that's maybe not by choice, that's by the request of the distributors' insurance companies themselves. As of yet, we haven't seen that need. We carry our own insurance, and we don't require that farmers do. But I always recommend that, just like any small business, that you look at insurance, and especially with food. It's just food safety is everything now in our industry, and so any producer or even any farmer, I would absolutely advise to carry your own insurance. But with that being said, we carry a lot of policies, and we can get into those later. But again, we don't ask a farmer to carry any particular insurance, and it'll vary by farmer. I know that's one of the big questions today, by your operation and the scope of your distribution and the product, and a lot of different questions. So as far as your particular need, I can't offer a lot of expertise there, but I can share what we do offer, or what we do carry as far as insurance. But I think that's really a personal decision, and it depends on your product, how you distribute, whether you're farm direct or whether you're working just through distributors, just through wholesalers. There's a lot of questions to ask there. So I think everybody's going to be a little different. I hope that answers the question. I might not be the best on this one. I think as far as particular policies, an insurance specialist is going to be the expert there. But
that's very, very helpful. Is there any experiences that you've encountered with issues with insurance in your, producers that you work with? We've never had the need to. I can't say that we've had any experience with producers' insurance directly.
Now, we've had a lot of our own insurance needs. I would say this, and I think this is a really good point to drive home. Food safety recalls and food safety issues are just a part of life now. We probably experience at least one recall per month now, and there are times when we have several in a week. And these aren't all local products, but food safety recalls are just a part of this business now. And it's surprising, most of them aren't what you typically expect. They're most often not pathogens. Now one of the most common causes is allergens and labeling. Pathogens are way down the list. It used to be that pathogens were, that when you thought of food safety, you thought of meats. Now when you think of food safety, we really think of produce. Well, when we look at the vast majority of recalls that we see, they're not even pathogen related. Most of them are labeling, or adulteration, or allergens, allergen control. But they're really a normal part of business now. Like I said, I'd imagine we go through at least once a month. Sometimes we have 2 or 3 in any given week. And that's just the nature of our business now. So it stresses the need for a valid and working food safety program, and proper record keeping, and GAP is a great step for local producers, and kind of the foundation of food safety. Our own food safety is actually, we're now SQF certified, the GFSI standard, and our audits, our most recent audit lasted about 4 days with a full-time auditor here in-house just a few weeks ago. And then in addition to that regular audit, we'll have audits, at least 2 or 3 surprise audits throughout the year for different management companies that we work with. So audits are even a regular part of our day-to-day life now. We have a full-time food safety manager who does nothing but manage our food safety program. So, and insurance is just a part of that. It just stresses the need for insurance, because it's not a question of if something's going to happen. It really has become a matter of when, and it's just how we need to do business these days.
Right. All right, we'll move
so
on.
We've had a few particulars. You asked about specific examples of insurance claims we've seen. The 3 most recent I can recall, and this is kind of gives you an idea of the variety of insurance issues you might run into. Last year we had a driver who veered off the road and struck a private business, and struck a telephone pole and then a business. So we lost a truck, and we had a lot of liability from that. And that's, just one of those things when we have 50 trucks on the road that can happen. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we had a cooler failure at our facility that involved a lot of product loss. We had to relocate our operation for a number of days, and a tremendous expense there, and that went to an insurance claim. And then this past winter, last year, in the big snowstorm, we had a loss of business for several days, and all of those, without insurance, would be really pretty major hits. So you really need a variety of insurance coverages and areas.
Right. Well, thank you for that. Move on to, what information should a producer be prepared to give their insurance agent? I think this is a better question for CD. So CD, if you could elaborate on us what kind of information you look for from producers.
Well, it's going to sound general, but I want to know everything. I want to know everything about the farm. I want to know everything about the business. There's no detail too small, because everything involves risk is the way that I tend to look at it. I want to know the financials of the business. What are your sales? I want to know what you're growing. I want to know what you're doing with that product. I want to know who who is on your farm. Are you letting, the public in? Are they allowed to pick things? And, are you using a third party to transport your goods? Are you leasing land? Do you live on the property? There is so much information, and depending on what you're doing, it's going to always open up more questions. So when you talk with your agent, he might seem like, or he or she might seem like they're asking a lot of questions, and some of them might seem a little crazy, like why do they need to know that? It's because somewhere something happened, and now that's something that we need to know. In the world we live in, there's more things that can go wrong. There's more lawsuits that get filed. So the more we know, the better. Is the farm in your name? Is it in an LLC, a corporation, a trust? So we can make sure that we have the entities properly covered. And that might involve giving them your federal ID number, your social security number, and your date of birth. There is so much. And if you leave something out, that's where I can't do my job as an agent, because I don't know what to cover you for. So don't ever leave anything out, answer all the questions, and don't be scared to divulge something because you think it might raise your rates. Most of the time, what people are scared to tell me doesn't really even affect their premium. But I need to know so I can make sure that you're covered for what is going on the land or with your products. So when you're ready to talk with your agent, sit down with them, call them, and be prepared to give them, everything and anything that they ask for, because without that information, we can't really do our job and properly cover you, which leaves you open and exposed, and potentially leaves you open for a major loss that's going to not just affect you right then and there, but it's going to affect, your family, the business, and it's not just an immediate loss. It could ruin a farm.
Right.
By not divulging everything.
So we just had one of our first questions come in. Why is your insurance canceled or raised after a claim? Is it based on the amount of the claim?
Maybe the underwriters from Kentucky Farm Bureau can better answer that, because there's a million reasons rates go up and down.
So Kevin, do you want to?
Sure. I'll say that, we continually underwrite. It's not, after we review the initial application, we don't put it in a filing cabinet and don't pull it out for 20 years. We're continually reviewing, as things occur, as, requests for additional coverage or different limits values are sent to us. We continually underwrite the exposures. Again, like was said before, to make sure that everything's covered correctly. We need that good picture of the operation. And along with that, we would include, any claim activity. Again, a single claim, it would be rare for, the ultimate negative action, a non-renewal to cause that to happen. One single claim. But again, amounts, timing of claims, why they happened, why they should not happen in the future. Lots of different things go into reviewing of claims.
I agree with that.
Right.
Yeah. And oftentimes a non-renewal comes because a carrier, I represent multiple different companies that insure farms. They get out of different types of businesses all the time. Not even just farms, but a company might want to write restaurants one year and they suffer bad losses, and now they don't want to write restaurants. So sometimes it's not just you or, your business, but they're getting out of that industry as a whole.
Great. So we'll move on here. What are some of the differences between on-farm market and off-farm market product liability? Kevin, do you want to touch on this a little bit?
I guess a little clarification. Are you speaking of perhaps a farmer that has a farm market there on their premises?
Right, like an on-farm retail facility based on
Right.
somebody that maybe participates in a roadside market or even works with a distributor to sell their product.
Uh, Truly, there's not much difference in how we would, review, underwrite, the product's exposure. Somewhat of it goes into more of your premises liability. If it's on your premises where customers come, the general public, we want to, make sure it's, safe walking areas, parking areas, clean, orderly, shop, store, market that you have on your premises. As far as the actual products themselves, that really wouldn't be different, between what's on at your farm or at a distributor's location.
Right. All right. Are there specific policies or coverages agribusiness producers should consider as it relates to both fresh and processed products? CD, you want to talk about this a little bit?
Yeah, there's, when it comes to what you're actually doing with your goods, if you have fresh product, or even processed, I want to know, are you processing everything on site? So if you're processing things on site, do you have coverage, not from a liability standpoint, but from a product standpoint for spoilage? If something needs to be kept at a certain temperature, there's brands and labels. So if something did happen, is there coverage to, replace labels? Because those are expensive. The equipment breakdown, because there's processing, there's equipment that's necessary to process your product that you grew and get it canned or whatever you're doing with it. So is there coverage, for that equipment? Fresh, both of them, are products, but from my standpoint, I want to know what you're doing with them because they're different risk. You're manufacturing something when you process a product. So it's a different exposure that needs to be noted on the policy to make sure that you are covered for doing something like that. And that's, one of the big things just to consider is making sure that we know what you're doing. Something else I always tell people to look for is, when you transport those goods, whether it is fresh or processed, are you transporting those goods or is there a third party that transports those goods? And if it's a third party that's, taking them from your farm, does that third party have coverage for your goods, or do you need to have that coverage for your goods? And it's something people don't think about because we think of pollution as being, oil and smog and things like that. But if you're transporting those goods and the trailer tips over, whether it be processed or fresh, that's technically pollution when it's on the road, and there's pollutant cleanup and removal. Do you have coverage for that on your policy? A banana truck spilled over and someone has to pay to clean that up, and that's pollution. There's been incidences where milk, a trailer full of milk has spilled on the road. Again, that's pollution. So for fresh and processed products, you just want to make sure that that your agent knows what you're doing, what it is that you're doing, and making sure that we have those coverages in place to properly cover them. With your brands and labels, are you potentially going to end up in a copyright infringement, lawsuit? So we want to make sure you've got coverage for that. If your label looks too much like someone else's label, or the product name is too much like someone else's product name, having that is important. And just knowing what you're doing with your products from an agent standpoint helps us pick the proper coverages and tailor them to you. There's a million different coverages for every different type of situation. And that's my job, is to take the information you give me and tailor a policy for you and your exposures.
Right. Kelly or Lynn, do you guys have anything to add to this?
I'll jump in just real quick. Just want to make the disclaimer. I don't think we've mentioned this before yet, but again, the three of us here, we're truly only speaking about the Kentucky Farm Bureau insurance products that we provide here in Kentucky. And again, we, aren't going to speak to, what other companies provide in their policies. We just have access to what we sell, and we're answering about our own company. And another caveat to throw out as well is the fact that, we're not licensed agents, we're in underwriting. And again, for true insurance consultation, suggest you see your actual insurance agent to check with them. But you were just right on the money as far as, the exposures, what you need to consider here, the way we work with farming operations. When a farmer, grows a crop and sells the crop, that's our farm product. When they start processing and changing that from its, original condition, that's when we, again, through consultation with your Farm Bureau agent, would look at getting a commercial policy to go side by side with your farm policy in order to cover the exposure from a processed food product.
Awesome. So when is additional insurance required because it reaches past the typical umbrella of a farm policy? So say you distribute your own products to restaurants or schools. When are you needing to look into different insurances to kind of cover those different odds and ends? And Kevin or Kelly or Lynn, you can probably touch on this a little bit.
I guess.
Well, like you said, with the processed product outside of the original product, then you're typically, for us in our farm policies, you're falling away from the farm policy into a commercial exposure. And so then that slides outside of the typical umbrella of the farm policy, would be one example.
And then truly, nothing really comes to mind as far as, additional insurance required. But, we'll say that, truly it gets into more of a contractual arrangement where your customers, again, even if it's just a restaurant that you sell to that requires insurance of certain values, of certain types, that's when, as soon as when you're thinking of entering into agreements with customers, that's when you should have conversations with your insurance agent to make sure that you meet the requirements of the contractual agreement that you've signed or are going to sign.
Right.
And I would always wait on signing that agreement until you talk to your agent if it asks for more insurance than what you have. You don't want to be in a situation where you're obligated to provide a certain amount of goods, unless, or you could face a penalty from, whoever you're selling to. Because sometimes the amount of what you're going to sell, it might not be worth it to pick up the extra $5 million to add a $5 million umbrella policy to be able to be, an approved vendor for a certain store or a certain, company. You don't want to lock yourself into something before you, talk to your agent and know what the costs are, what the additional insurance you might need.
Yeah, because we're going to want to know what it is that they may be requiring of you so that we can evaluate it accordingly.
All right, thank you. So what are some of the unique risks associated with manufactured food products in comparison to fresh food products? Craig, would you like to get in and discuss this a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be glad to answer that one. You know, the biggest and most obvious is food safety. You know, above and beyond your typical liability incidents, whether you have somebody visiting a farm market, you know, you have public on your land, and you may have a delivery truck. But you know, as far as unique to food and food manufacturing, food safety is the monster. And it's the variety of food safety issues, like I touched on this earlier, that I think is most important. Most commonly now, like I said, it's not typically pathogens. When we think of food safety, we first go to pathogens. We think of foodborne illness. But the number one recall that we see now is allergens and/or labeling, usually undeclared allergens. We see more recalls due to undeclared allergens than anything. And some years ago, we hardly had to consider allergens in our own operation, you know, as far as storage and shipping. And now it's a part of everyday life, where we store products, how we store them, and labeling on every product across the board. And we have about 7,000 products, and allergen labeling is a factor in every single one of them. So there's a variety of food safety things, and I jotted down a couple of them. Allergens is number one. Labeling is really high, and then product adulteration, especially if you're you know, producing a value-added product like something jarred or packaged in some way. You know, adulteration, be it from your process or from foreign matter, or even from one of your ingredients, especially packaging. You know, we're at the point where now most folks, you actually have to track that packaging, much like an ingredient, and give food packaging pretty much the same food safety considerations as you do the food itself. There's very little distinction in terms of your process and your handling of the packaging. Your packaging really needs to be considered like a food grade product, an edible product. Yeah, so I think that's really the best answer I have there. Those are the big guys.
Okay. So we just got another question in. It's worst case scenario. If we sell a food product to a grocer and there's a consumer claim of injury, are we personally liable beyond the insurance policy limits, assuming we aren't being negligent? CD, do you want to touch on that?
I tell everybody, and when they have questions like that, you know, the answer is you can be. You know, if something goes to court and it's sitting before a judge, anything can happen when you get in front of that limestone building downtown. And, you know, your insurance is there to help, you know, to protect you. I think the biggest thing outside of the $1 million of insurance that you might carry is the fact that they have the duty to defend a claim that's covered. And that's what you're going to get out of it, is a law team that I know I couldn't afford, that specializes in, you know, the area that the lawsuit's filed in, whatever it's filed on. Like, you're going to have a team of lawyers that's all they do, is deal with these types of claims that are going to, you know, kind of take that for you. Can it? Yes. But, you know, it's all up in the air when you get in front of a judge. A judge can do whatever they want. And, you know, Kevin, you might have some more input on that from some things that you've seen.
I think you're hitting it right on the head there, that, again, if you're not liable, well, really the determinant of if you're liable or not is going to be the person wearing the black robe. They're the ones that's going to determine if you're liable. And So it's up to them to decide. I've seen some cases in the past where I would have bet my house that the ruling would be not liable, innocent, but it went the other way. And there's some that I thought was a slam dunk, probably negligent, and it comes back as no negligence found. So it just depends upon the situation. You can only do what you can do as a producer, as a consumer, as a person in our society. The best that you can, the protections that you can arrange for your livelihood.
Does that imply that we should carry more coverage than we need as agribusiness producers, just to protect ourselves from this kind of scenario?
I think that's definitely a good conversation to have with whoever your agent is. Again, you want to, as best possible, adequately, protect your assets, your future earnings capability as well. Again, worst case does happen sometimes, but the normal is what happens on average. So again, it's up to you, your agent, to discuss the particular circumstance that you have, the type of crop you have, the type of operation you have.
And my personal rule of thumb is I always offer an umbrella policy, which, if your standard limits that I'm going to provide of liability are $1 million per occurrence, $2 million max per year, I want to offer $1 million umbrella policy on top of that. So in the event of a claim, the max payout then is $2 million. And prices always vary, but they're not that expensive considering what you're getting for it. And if you have anything of value, which I know everyone does because they're on land, you don't want to see anything happen to it. And I always offer it and let my client decide to reject that extra coverage or accept it. It's a decision you have to make, but it's something I always like to offer.
So that's kind of like a perfect segue into our next question, which is, what's reasonable in terms of coverage for various market? So,
are you talking like the limits, of liability,
and
how much coverage or cost?
Yes. So how much, if I was a maple syrup producer and I was selling my product to a restaurant, what is reasonable coverage for me to have? Would a $1 million policy be reasonable, or should I go for more, or could I get less if needed?
Yeah, I'm sure people will write less. My personal rule of thumb is I always write $1 million per occurrence, $2 million in the aggregate. That's the most a policy will pay out in 1 year. That is the lowest I write for any commercial exposure, any business exposure. Claims are too expensive nowadays for me to offer anything less, and I don't want to be that. I just don't want to be put in a position where one of my clients didn't have enough coverage. So that's my personal. There are lower limits available, but pricing it varies so much because your extra $1 million of your umbrella coverage is that pricing is based off of the pricing of the main policy, and depending on where it's located, what you're doing, how much of it you're doing. There's so much that goes into these factors, and I'm sure the underwriters can definitely touch on that because they're the ones that give me the prices as the agent. So to come up with a ballpark figure, that's difficult because every single policy and every farm is different. On paper they might look the same, but their pricing could be completely different just based on several different factors.
Absolutely.
But I think $1 million, $2 million is a great starting point to make sure that you're covered. And I always recommend the extra $1 million umbrella.
Kevin, do you guys want to add to that any?
Again, we're not really consultative with our insureds. It's more our agents' jobs, but definitely, my personal suggestion is for everybody to get as much as they feel capable of being able to pay for and wanting to make that buying decision. Like was mentioned earlier, court cost awards are continually increasing, and $1 million isn't what it used to be a few years ago, it seems like. And again, the whole idea is to protect your assets, and again, what you're able to what you decide to do hopefully is going to be adequate for what might happen. Of course, we never know what's going to happen. Umbrella is always a very wise thing to consider. Definitely, it's a good way to get higher limits. I would like to say too, as far as the various marketing channels that you might come across, if it's time for you to renew your insurance, or you're just now starting off and getting your first policy, I think you probably kind of want to look for who your customer is going to be. Who is going to be the purchaser of your crop, of what you produce, and consider that at the get-go when you're obtaining your insurance. And again, you don't want to start off with a policy and a month later when your customer says, well, we won't buy from a farm that does not have at least a $2 million limit. So, if you can kind of look downfield from the beginning, that might help you making a lot of changes on your policy down the road.
Right. So could you help us kind of understand what the difference is between the role of an underwriter and the role of an agent?
Do you want to go first?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess that's actually like I guess that's how the channels always go. As an agent, I randomly go out and cold call on businesses, and then people call me. And if together we feel like we'd be a good fit, my job is to field underwrite, is what I believe a lot of my underwriters encourage us to do. I am the first line of defense to making sure that the business that I'm submitting to my underwriter is qualified and is good business, and that I'm properly covering that. I'm going to get all the information. I'm the fact finder. I'm going to put together the coverages that I think would best suit, and properly cover your type of business. And then I submit all of that information to my underwriter, and they might come back with additional questions and, have me follow up with you on some more information. And I hand it off to the underwriters. And from there, it's in their hands until I get a proposal back. But I work hand in hand with my underwriters. I know them all very well because it's a relationship. I'm face to face. They just have to trust the information that I'm giving them.
Yeah, and I would say from the underwriter's perspective, yeah, we're checking on what the agent has written, making sure everything looks okay, making sure it's something that Kentucky Farm Bureau wants to insure, and making sure, being maybe a second set of eyes that looks over the policy to make sure that we didn't miss anything, or there's not something else that we need to add to the policy to make sure that the insured has everything covered that they need.
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, we work together, I guess, to figure out, what's best, and ultimately it's, the client's decision on what coverages they do and don't want. But that's, I mean, yeah, it is. It's two sets of eyes making sure we have, our bases covered.
So we had another question come in. Can you ballpark for us the different costs between a $1 million and $2 million umbrella policy?
I mean, your umbrella policy covers not just, the farm, but a lot of times it will extend to the auto. And then it's going to depend on, is it a corporation? Is it in your individual name? So it's hard, but I have written umbrella policies that range from $500 to $1,200, and they can go up higher than that depending on how large of an exposure everything is and how much. So for $1 million, on an average size farm that's not doing something that's high risk without a lot of auto exposure, I mean, $500 to $1,000. Like I said, don't quote me on that. Don't hold me to it or hold your agents to it. But that's about what it runs. My personal umbrella policy, I don't have a farm, just a house and 2 cars, but it's $200 a year. But for some of my businesses, they run, $1,000 is like a pretty good starting point, and then it can go up or down from there based on what you have going on. Just to add an extra $1 million, and it's pretty much tiered that same way. And I tell people all the time, how much is it going to cost you to put a lawyer on retainer? Because as soon as you call them, their clock's ticking, and they're sometimes $800 an hour. So for the cost of about 2 hours of a lawyer fee, you can get an extra $1 million.
And that's annually, correct?
Yes. Okay. Again, though, that is just shooting from the hip, and I think the underwriters would agree with me on that. They've probably seen them all over the board. It's just, I think that's an okay number to kind of throw out there. It's just hard. It's hard.
Yeah, there's so many variables involved, but again, for a small farm, a couple of vehicles total, it shouldn't be more than a few $100s. And then when you get into, the very large farms, then of course it can be, it's going to be more expensive. Again, it just depends upon, various different factors, but it can be, in my opinion, very affordable for that larger limit that you have available to cover your exposures.
And you can always ask your agent. Like it truly takes me, I'm sure the underwriters, not that much additional time to quote an umbrella. A lot of my underwriters just say, hey, if they want an umbrella, here's about what it will cost. I would just need some additional information. And that's something that, so it's not, you're not going to burden us as agents, and we won't burden our underwriters by asking about umbrella policies. It's something that I think we all encourage and want our insureds to have.
Right. So we'll move on here to our last question. What are some experiences or examples of managing insurance claims with agribusinesses? Kevin, do you want to touch on this?
Unfortunately, Lynn had an engagement he had to leave for. He's been involved in the farm area much longer than Kelly or I.
Right.
And again, literally it can go from A to Z on the vast wide range of types of farms we have here in Kentucky. Again, typically what we see more of, the vast majority are property claims, be it to your main dwelling, your outbuildings, your barns, your silos, to your equipment, fires, thefts, vandalisms, what have you. So again, it just goes from A to Z pretty much. Of course, you always are concerned with, perhaps animals getting out of your fences and liability from what happens after that, after they escape your farm. But, nothing truly comes to mind as far as unique or more unusual examples.
Okay. Craig, do you maybe want to elaborate more on managing some of the examples that you discussed earlier?
Sure, I'm glad to. I said I had three recently that came to mind, and this is probably in the last 2 years. And the first involved a driver who was operating our truck, and on a public road veered off, struck a utility pole, struck a building, and that's one of the obvious ones that you might expect if you have a driver. Actually, we had another one when I come think of it. We had a truck that rolled, and we lost a truck full of product, and we carry our own insurance. Everybody's different, but I was talking with our management this week about our different policies and our different coverages. And one of them that we carry is insurance on the product, so that if we lose a truck, if a refrigerator breaks en route, or if a truck tips over, we have insurance against the product, whether it's from spoilage or from disruption, say in an accident. But in that case, we actually lost the truck itself, which was probably an $80,000 truck, a refrigerated truck, and then had the property claim on top of that. But one of the more odd ones that we had a few years ago, in our warehouse, we lost a cooler over the weekend. We lost some compressors, and we didn't diagnose it right away because of the way that it occurred, but and it couldn't be quickly repaired because it was a large compressor. So we had a period of days, I think it was 4 or 5 days, where our coolers were down, and we actually had to relocate a lot of our operation and borrow cooler space and move product, because meanwhile, business goes on, and we've got deliveries to make, and we had product incoming and being received, and it was a real scramble to relocate all that product and just to operate in the meanwhile. And I know insurance had to step in that case, not only with the product loss from the incident, but with the added operating expense that we had in the week ahead. And then another big incident I remember, and this is probably one of the larger claims I recall lately, was, and I mentioned this earlier, I think it was last winter in one of the snowstorms, that we, if I remember right, it came on a Thursday or Friday, and Nashville in particular, which is one of our biggest markets, was really, really heavily hit with ice and snow, and it just crippled the city, and it was crippling to us for a few days, just in terms of business. So we had, we move a lot of product, and we have a lot of product en route, and when you have a regional disruption to business like that, it might be, it could be a hurricane, as happened recently. It could be a snowstorm. It could be all kinds of things. But we had a variety of expenses, and across a big operation, they really start to add up. And they could be crippling, especially to a smaller business, and to a bigger business like us, the numbers were kind of scary. We basically shut down the business for a few days. Nobody was buying any product, and meanwhile, we had product coming in. So we had a loss of revenue, and we had a loss of business claim in that incident. And we had a lot of spoilage of product over the next week that we had to work out with the insurance company. So you just never know. And in these examples I've quoted, it's interesting that we have yet, this might separate us a little bit from a producer, but we have yet to have a product-related insurance claim. And I think that's kind of interesting. We've never had any litigation or liability as it relates to product, which is kind of where your mind goes when you think about insurance and liability. But that has yet to be the case. I don't know if a farmer, I noticed earlier when the underwriters were talking about the incidents they see insuring farms, it's mainly property and incidents like that, and it's rarely the product, which is kind of what your mind first goes to when you think about insurance and liability. But we have yet to face any liability due to a product in itself or anything stemming from the actual product. It's always the unexpected. So
I'll throw out this. Again, my day-to-day is in the commercial insurance area, not in farm. But again, we do a lot of commercial coverage types of coverages for our farmers that need and desire. And I will say that we've had, it seems like in the last 18 months or so, a few different cargo losses, which again, something to consider. If say, you raise soybean or what have you, and your contract with your buyer is that you deliver it to their location, you would need coverage while it's in transit on your trucks going to the processor or the purchaser. And we've had, a few trucks turn over en route, and on the face of it, you think, well, what's going to happen to a soybean, in transit? But if it turns over, you're basically, basically lost the whole shipment, and those, of course, are quite expensive. And we have had, I think, a truck of cattle overturned, and that was not pleasant. So, things to consider that typically might not necessarily be covered under a farm policy, like growing crops. But if you're shipping them yourselves, or someone else is shipping them and they're not covering it in transit, then you need to consider transit coverage.
Great stuff. One more question from our producers. Are there any types of risk or exposure that producers tend to overlook or underestimate? And this is probably a better question for Kevin and CD.
I mean, that's, I guess my job is to just keep digging and keep diving into your operations to try and get as much information as possible. I think people are more hesitant to fully disclose because they fear that the insurance is going up. I mean, I understand most farmers are not, Fortune 500 companies. They don't have a $30,000, $100,000, $200,000 budget each year for insurance. Like, I feel like as an agent, like I'm literally reaching into your pocket and taking the money out to pay for your premium. And so I understand that fear, but I think that's the biggest, I guess that part of it is the part that's overlooked. It is the importance of fully disclosing everything, because you're worried about the premiums going up, and 99% of the time, it won't affect it. It's just going to allow me to do a better job for you. Tell people there's no use, regardless of the cost. There's no point in paying for something that doesn't work. And I think that's something that is completely, I guess, I don't want to say that it's overlooked, but that is the one part, I guess, that's hard for me as an agent to know that, something wasn't covered, but I didn't know. Then I'm thinking, should have asked more questions? But that's why it's just an open dialogue between you and your agent. Be close with them as anything changes, anything that you do changes. Call them and let them know. Ask them about it.
Right, and that's what
we appreciate it.
Yeah, chime in on is the fact of when you do have the extensive dialogue with your agent at the beginning, don't forget to have conversations as your operations change. The agent, probably doesn't know if you don't tell him or her. So, keep the lines of communication open. It might seem like it's a non-issue to you of the difference in your operation that's occurring, but it could, make a big impact. And chances are it's not going to change your premium. But again, the agent and the company need to know that information. So again, we can make sure that you're properly covered. We're there to protect your assets.
Yeah, and I don't know anybody that has read their entire policy. I mean, they're not the most exciting 100+ pages to read, but in those pages, there are tons of, things that are coverages that are excluded, but then you can get that coverage back. And it's very hard to dissect. So call us, let us know. We'll take a look. We'll let you know. Yes, you're covered for that. No, you're not covered for that exposure. Let's take a look. And that's when I call the underwriter and say, hey, they're looking at doing this. What do we want to do about it? It's, at the rate insurance changes, at the rate our world's changing and the different claims that are getting filed, it blows my mind sometimes, some of the claims that I see come through. I didn't even think it was feasible for something like that to happen, but it does. And that's why that open dialogue is so important, because there's a lot of pages to that policy that I bet most people don't read through the entire packet.
Well, guys, I think that is all the time that we have for today. I just want to thank everybody, Kevin, Kelly, CD, and Cray, for helping us out and being a part of this webinar. A lot of good information was shared with our producers today, and just want to really stress the importance of being properly insured and getting out there and talking to your agent and making sure that you understand what your distributor requires and what your farm requires. And so thank you guys for being here. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to contact me or Tim. Some of the contact information for our guests are on the information page that was sent out to you guys in the email with access. I would also like to mention that we have a food safety and quality assurance webinar coming up in November. So everybody keep their eyes open for that. And also, we will be sending out a survey in either tomorrow probably, just to get a feel for how everything went. Real short, should only take about 5 minutes. And additionally, if you have any other people with you, please in the chat box let us know how many people are with you, so we can get an idea of kind of how many people there were out there that we helped. So thank you again to all of our guest speakers. Thank you to our sponsors. And do you, CD, Kevin, or Cray, do you guys have anything that you'd like to part with?
Just thank you guys for having us. And maybe I'm biased because I'm an agent, but insurance is important. And I know as much as people don't like to deal with it. So just stay in contact with your agent. Let them know what's going on. That's just the most important thing, I think.
Yes. Again, we appreciate you inviting us to participate, and good luck to everyone out there. And again, feel free to contact your agent, or please contact your agent and make sure that you're properly covered.